The gang hunted in packs, preying on those they deemed vulnerable. Their eyes landed on two black men. Twins, nearly identical, stood side by side. To the gang, they looked like easy prey. Just another chance to assert dominance. But what they couldn't see was the years of shared battles, the discipline and chemistry forged in some of the most dangerous corners of the world. The twins weren't just bonded by blood. They were trained to move as one, to endure, and to fight with precision. As the gang grew bolder, their taunts turning to threats, the twins' calm exteriors showed nothing of the storm brewing beneath. The men who thought they had found easy targets were about to discover how dangerous their assumptions truly were. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe. The dim glow of streetlights flickered over the quiet neighborhood as Jason and Jordan Reed walked side by side down the cracked pavement. They moved in unison, their strides naturally synchronized, a trait honed from years of working together in high-stakes military operations. Though they'd traded battlefields for civilian life, their sharp eyes and guarded expressions betrayed a readiness to act at a moment's notice. "I still don't see why you dragged me out here," Jordan muttered, shifting the gym bag slung over his shoulder. "I had plans tonight, you know." Jason smirked. "What plans? Watching old fight tapes? You're predictable, little brother." "By 6 minutes," Jordan shot back, rolling his eyes. Their banter softened the tension in the air, but it wasn't enough to drown out the unease that had gripped their community. For weeks now, reports of brutal, targeted attacks had circulated. A gang of bald, tattooed men preying on black residents. The details were chilling, but the motive was even worse. Jason and Jordan had returned home to reconnect with their roots, but now they couldn't ignore the growing fear in their city. "Think it's true?" Jordan asked, his voice quieter now. "The whole bounty thing?" Jason nodded grimly. "Maria wouldn't have called me if it wasn't. She said it's organized, bigger than we think." Before Jordan could respond, a faint sound caught their attention. A low murmur of voices, followed by the scrape of boots on asphalt. The twins instinctively slowed their pace, their senses sharp. "You hear that?" Jason asked, his tone shifting to the clipped precision of a soldier. Jordan nodded, his eyes scanning the shadows. "Yeah, we've got company." From an alleyway ahead, a group of men emerged, their faces lit by the pale streetlights. Bald heads glinted, and inked skin stretched over muscle. One of them, taller than the rest, stepped forward with a twisted grin. "Well, look at what we've got here," the leader drawled, his voice dripping with venom. "2 for the price of 1. The gang spread out, cutting off the twins' path. The air grew heavier as tension crackled like a live wire. Jason and Jordan exchanged a glance, a silent agreement. "Guess we're not making it home on time," Jason muttered. "Wouldn't want it any other way," Jordan replied, his fists clenching. The gang spread out in a semicircle, their movements deliberate as they closed in. Each man bore the same unmistakable look. Shaved heads, tattoos etched into skin like road maps of violence. At the center stood the leader, taller and broader than the others, his arms crossed over his chest. A snake coiled across his neck, its head poised to strike just above his collarbone. "Lucky night for you boys," the leader sneered, his grin widening. "We only need one of you. Boss is paying for a beating, not a massacre. So, here's how it's gonna work. You two decide who's staying, and the other can walk away. Easy, right?" Jason and Jordan didn't flinch. "Yeah, real easy," Jason replied, his voice steady. He stepped forward, his eyes locking onto the leaders. "You can take your offer and shove it." The gang chuckled darkly, their amusement underpinned by malice. Jordan tilted his head, his gaze scanning the group. "Let me guess. Big man, here's the one who counts to 10 for the rest of you, huh?" The laughter stopped. The leader's grin faded, replaced by a scowl. "Funny guy, huh? You won't be laughing when we're done with you." The man to his right, a wiry figure with flames tattooed across his arms, spoke up, his voice dripping with venom. "Ain't nobody getting out of this looking pretty. But hey, maybe y'all are used to being stepped on. That's what your kind does best, right?" Jordan's jaw tightened. He took a step forward, but Jason's arm shot out, barring his path. "Don't," Jason said quietly. Jordan's eyes burned, but he obeyed, taking a slow breath. Jason turned his attention back to the leader, his tone ice cold. "You think you're in charge here?" Jason asked. "You've got numbers, you've got muscles, but you don't have what we have." The leader chuckled, spreading his arms theatrically. "And what's that, huh? A good sob story? Maybe some prayers?" "No," Jason said, his voice low. "Training, discipline, and a hell of a lot more fight than you'll ever have." The gang shifted uneasily, their bravado faltering for a split second before the leader barked out a laugh. "Big talk, but it won't mean a damn thing when you're both bleeding on the ground." The man with the flame tattoos leaned in, grinning. "Still waiting for you to pick, boys. Who's the brave one, and who's the coward?" Jordan's lips curled into a smirk, his tone laced with mockery. "How about you pick? Start with me. I promise it'll be the worst mistake you've ever made." The gang leader's eyes narrowed, his pride clearly stung. He pointed at Jordan. "Fine. You're up first, and when I'm done with you, your brother can crawl back to whatever hole you two came out of." Jason stepped in front of Jordan, his fists clenched. "If you want him, you'll have to go through me first." The gang erupted in laughter, but it was hollow now, a forced sound meant to mask their growing unease. "Oh, this is gonna be fun," the leader said, cracking his knuckles. "2 for 1 special. Let's see what you've got." The twins exchanged a look, years of unspoken communication passing between them in an instant. They knew this wasn't just about them anymore. These men weren't here for a random scuffle. They were predators, emboldened by the promise of money and the sick thrill of hatred. Walking away wasn't an option. Not tonight. Jason took a slow breath, steadying himself. "Jordan, you ready?" "Born ready," Jordan replied, his tone light, but his stance already shifting into a combat position. The leader grinned, gesturing to his crew. "Get 'em!" The gang surged forward, and the night erupted into chaos. The first man charged forward, fists swinging wildly, but Jason sidestepped with practiced ease, landing a sharp elbow to the side of his attacker's head. The man crumpled, groaning as he hit the ground. Another rushed Jordan, aiming a heavy punch at his ribs, but Jordan ducked low, driving his shoulder into the man's stomach and sending him sprawling onto the pavement. "Is this all you've got?" Jordan taunted, straightening up as the remaining gang members hesitated. The leader's grin faltered as he glanced at the 2 fallen men. "Get up!" he barked, but neither moved, groaning in pain. Jason turned his sharp gaze to the rest of the group, his voice calm but commanding. "You might want to rethink this. We're not like the others you've gone after." One of the gang members, a younger man with a nervous look in his eyes, shifted uncomfortably. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, his voice wavering. Jason took a step forward, his imposing presence making the man flinch. "The question isn't who we are," Jason said. "It's why you're so eager to throw yourselves into a fight you can't win." The leader stepped in, his face twisted in anger. "Shut up," he snapped at his crew. "They're just 2 guys. You scared of a couple of—" Jason cut him off, his tone steely. "2 guys who just took down 2 of yours in under a minute. You sure you want to keep going?" The group hesitated, exchanging uncertain glances. The tension hung heavy in the air until the leader growled and shoved one of the men forward. "Don't just stand there! Get them!" But the man didn't move. Instead, he pointed at the twins, his voice trembling. "They're not normal, boss. Did you see how fast they moved? They're just freaks," the leader snapped, his tone dripping with venom. "Doesn't matter how fast they are, we're taking back this town, one undesirable at a time." Jordan's jaw tightened, his fists clenching as he took a step forward. "Undesirable?" he spat. "That's what this is about? You think you get to decide who belongs here?" The leader smirked, crossing his arms. "Damn right we do. This town used to be clean, used to have respect. Now it's crawling with your kind, taking up space, lowering property values. So yeah, we're cleaning up. Starting with you two." Jordan took another step forward, but Jason's hand shot out, gripping his brother's shoulder. "Don't," Jason said softly, though his eyes never left the leader. "Let him talk." Jordan hesitated, then stepped back, though his fists remained clenched. "You're pathetic," Jason said, his voice low and even, hiding behind numbers, behind hate. "You think you're doing something noble? You're nothing but cowards." The leader's grin twisted into a snarl. "Cowards? You've got a big mouth for someone who's outnumbered." Jason raised an eyebrow, gesturing to the two unconscious men on the ground. "Outnumbered? Doesn't seem like the odds are in your favor anymore." The younger gang member spoke up again, his voice shaking. "Boss, maybe we should just—" "Shut up!" the leader roared, turning on him. "You think they're gonna walk out of here after what they've done? After what they are? No. This is where it ends for them." Jason's expression hardened. "No," he said quietly. "This is where it ends for you." The words hung in the air, a chilling promise that sent a ripple of doubt through the gang. But the leader's pride wouldn't let him back down. He raised his hands, signaling his men to move. "Get them!" he ordered, his voice venomous. The gang members hesitated for only a moment before surging forward again. Jason and Jordan braced themselves, ready for the next wave. The gang surged forward like a wave, but Jason and Jordan moved as one, their battlefield instincts kicking in. They didn't need words. Years of fighting side by side had forged an unbreakable bond. Every movement, every strike was synchronized, flowing seamlessly from one brother to the other. Jason lunged first, intercepting a burly attacker who aimed a wild swing at Jordan. He ducked the punch, grabbing the man's wrist and twisting it sharply. The gang member howled in pain as Jason drove his knee into the man's gut, sending him sprawling to the ground. Jordan pivoted behind his brother, grabbing a smaller, wiry man who tried to flank them. With a quick feint, Jordan dodged the man's jab, countering with a brutal hook that sent him stumbling. Before the attacker could recover, Jordan grabbed his shirt, yanked him forward, and delivered a crushing elbow to the side of his head. Another gang member charged in, swinging a crowbar wildly. Jason sidestepped, the metal barely grazing his arm, and delivered a swift uppercut to the man's jaw. As the crowbar clattered to the ground, Jason snatched it up, using it to block an incoming punch from another attacker before swinging it low to sweep the man's legs out from under him. "Cover me!" Jason barked, tossing the crowbar aside as he advanced on the leader. "On it!" Jordan called back, pivoting to intercept two gang members who were circling behind them. The first man rushed him, throwing a heavy punch aimed at Jordan's face. Jordan ducked, grabbed the man's outstretched arm, and used his momentum to flip him over his shoulder. The man hit the ground hard, groaning, as Jordan turned to face the second. "Your turn," Jordan muttered, cracking his knuckles. The second man hesitated, his confidence faltering as he glanced at the growing pile of his unconscious comrades. "What's the matter?" Jordan taunted. "Losing your nerve?" the man growled, charging in with a flurry of punches. Jordan blocked each one with ease, his movements calculated and precise. He let the attacker tire himself out before landing a devastating right hook that sent the man crumpling to the pavement. Meanwhile, Jason was locked in a brutal exchange with Rico, the gang leader. Rico was stronger, his punches heavy and punishing, but Jason was faster, weaving around the blows with military precision. Rico's face twisted in frustration as Jason ducked under another swing and countered with a quick jab to his ribs, followed by a sharp kick to his knee. "You're good," Rico growled, wiping blood from his mouth, "but not good enough." Jason didn't respond, his focus unwavering. He feinted left, drawing Rico off balance before delivering a powerful kick to his chest that sent him stumbling back. Across the makeshift battlefield, Jordan had drawn the attention of 3 remaining gang members. They circled him like predators, trying to coordinate their attacks. "You boys think 3-on-1's fair?" Jordan quipped, shifting into a defensive stance. One of the men lunged, aiming for Jordan's legs, while the other 2 swung high. Jordan sidestepped the first attack, grabbed the second man's arm mid-swing, and used him as a shield against the third. The 2 collided with a sickening thud, leaving only one standing. "You sure you don't want to sit this one out?" Jordan asked, tilting his head. The remaining man snarled, rushing forward, But Jordan was ready. He ducked low, swept the man's legs out from under him, and finished with a knee to his chest. Jason and Jordan regrouped, standing back to back as the remaining gang members hesitated. Their confidence shattered. "You've got nothing left," Jason said, his voice cold. "Walk away while you can." Rico spat on the ground, his face twisted with rage. "This ain't over," he snarled. "Not by a long shot." Jason and Jordan exchanged a glance, their expressions grim. "No," Jason replied. "It's over when we say it is." The gang regrouped, their hesitation fading as Rico barked orders. "Enough playing around. Focus on one of them. Divide and conquer." His voice was sharp, carrying the weight of desperation and fury. Jason and Jordan read the shift in the gang's movements instantly. The remaining men closed in tighter, their steps more deliberate, their gazes darting between the twins. "They're trying to split us," Jason murmured, his voice tight. "Let 'em try," Jordan replied, cracking his neck. "They'll regret it." The gang moved in formation, Rico pointing at Jason. Two men lunged at him, forcing him to sidestep and defend. A third man rushed Jordan, but it was a feint. Two more circled behind him, one grabbing his arm, while another landed a punch across his ribs. "Jordan!" Jason yelled, but he was pinned down himself, blocking a wild swing from one man while narrowly dodging another. Jordan growled in frustration, ripping his arm free from his attacker's grasp and shoving the man backward. The second attacker tried to follow up, but Jordan turned quickly, landing a brutal elbow to his jaw. "Jason, I'm fine," Jordan called, but his voice carried a sharp edge. Jason wasn't convinced. As he disarmed one gang member, landing a sharp jab to his throat, he glanced toward his brother and saw it. The opening the gang had been waiting for. Rico himself moved in, aiming a blow at Jordan's back while he was distracted by another attacker. "Jordan, behind you!" Jason shouted, but it was too late. The blow landed squarely between Jordan's shoulders, forcing him to his knees. Rico smirked, standing over him. "Not so tough now, huh?" Jason saw red. The pain in his side was forgotten as rage took over. His brother, his partner, was down, and these men thought they'd won. That was all the fuel he needed. With a guttural yell, Jason charged at Rico, barreling through two gang members who tried to block his path. His movements were precise, but fueled by raw emotion. One man swung a bat at him, but Jason caught it mid-swing, yanking it free and tossing it aside before delivering a crushing punch to the man's jaw. Rico barely had time to turn before Jason was on him. Jason tackled him to the ground, his fists raining down like hammer blows. "You think you can touch him?" Jason snarled, his voice trembling with fury. "You think you can hurt him and walk away?" Rico raised his arms to block the blows, but Jason's strength was overwhelming. Each hit forced the gang leader further into the pavement, his smug expression replaced with one of fear. The remaining gang members hesitated, watching their leader being dismantled. "Get him off me!" Rico yelled, his voice panicked, but none of them moved. Jordan, despite the pain in his back, struggled to his feet. He stumbled toward the remaining men, his glare enough to send two of them retreating. "You really want to keep going?" Jordan growled, his voice low and dangerous. "Because I've got more where that came from." The gang broke. One by one, they backed away, dragging their injured comrades with them. Only Rico remained pinned beneath Jason, his face bloodied, his breath ragged. "Jason," Jordan said, stepping closer. His tone was firm but laced with concern. "He's done. Let him go." Jason hesitated, his fists trembling in the air. Slowly, he looked up at his brother, the rage in his eyes giving way to clarity. "He's not walking away from this," Jason muttered, his voice cold. "He's not," Jordan agreed, resting a hand on Jason's shoulder. "But we've got bigger things to deal with. He's not worth it." Jason let out a sharp breath, his fists unclenching. He stood, towering over Rico, who coughed and struggled to prop himself up. "This isn't over," Rico wheezed, his voice weak but defiant. "Yes, it is," Jason replied, his voice like steel. "Next time, there won't be anyone left to save you." Rico scrambled to his feet, clutching his side. "Retreat!" He barked at the remaining men. "Let's go!" The gang disappeared into the shadows, their confidence shattered. Jason and Jordan stood alone in the street, battered but unbroken. "You good?" Jason asked, glancing at his brother. Jordan smirked, despite the pain. "Better than Rico." Jason chuckled dryly, though his gaze remained fixed on the direction the gang had fled. "This isn't over," he said, more to himself than anyone. "Not until we shut them down for good." Jason and Jordan ran as fast as they could, their footsteps pounding against the pavement. The shadows of the quiet streets stretched long and jagged under flickering streetlights. Jason clutched his side, his breath coming in ragged gasps, but he pushed through the pain, focused on putting as much distance between them and the gang as possible. They didn't stop until they reached the edge of a small park, hidden beneath a canopy of trees. Jason leaned heavily against one of the trunks, while Jordan paced in tight circles, his fists clenched and his jaw tight. "What the hell just happened back there?" Jordan demanded, his voice sharp and edged with anger. Jason, still catching his breath, shook his head. "We got targeted, plain and simple." He pressed a hand to his ribs, wincing. "This wasn't random, Jordan. You saw how they moved. They were organized, and Rico wasn't bluffing about their intent." Jordan stopped pacing, turning to face his brother. "They didn't just pick a fight. They came looking for us. You heard him. Undesirables. That wasn't some generic insult. That was a mission." Jason straightened, his expression dark. "And that bounty he mentioned? It's real. Someone is putting money on people like us. This wasn't just about taking us down. It's bigger than that." Jordan ran a hand through his hair, frustration brimming in his every movement. "We knew something was brewing in this town. Maria told you. But this is next level. These guys aren't just thugs. They're part of something organized." Jason nodded grimly. "It's worse than we thought. They've got a plan, and they're not just hitting us. They're targeting the entire community." Jordan let out a bitter laugh, pacing again. "And for what? Some sick power trip? That whole taking back the town nonsense? Who are these guys?" Jason's eyes narrowed as he thought back to the fight. "Rico's not the mastermind. He's just muscle. Someone else is funding this. Someone with a lot of money and influence. And if we don't stop it, they're going to keep escalating." Jordan turned to him, his expression resolute. "Then we don't let them. But we need to move fast. If they're this coordinated, they've already got a head start." Jason winced as he shifted, the pain in his ribs a harsh reminder of how close they'd come to losing. "First, we need to regroup. Figure out our next steps. We can't charge into this blind." Jordan nodded reluctantly. "What about Maria? Think she knows more than she told you?" "She might," Jason replied. "And if she doesn't, we'll make sure she finds out. She's got the connections we need to figure out who's really behind this." Jordan crossed his arms, glancing toward the distant lights of the city. "Do you think this bounty thing is citywide? Or is it bigger than that?" Jason's face hardened. "If it's happening here, it's happening somewhere else too. But right now, we need to focus on stopping it here. Every minute we wait, someone else could be next." Jordan exhaled sharply, his gaze darkening. "We've seen this kind of thing before, haven't we? Back overseas. People being targeted, communities torn apart. And now it's here." Jason met his brother's gaze, his voice steady despite the storm building inside him. "Yeah, but this time, we're not soldiers following orders. We're the ones calling the shots." Jordan smirked faintly, though his eyes burned with determination. "Good. I prefer it that way." Jason glanced back toward the direction they'd come from. The bloodstains on the pavement, the shattered weapons left behind, they were all reminders of the violence that had unfolded. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "Not even close." Jordan agreed. "So, what's next?" Jason turned back to his brother, his voice filled with resolve. "We track Rico. We find out who's pulling his strings, and we shut them down for good." The next morning, Jason and Jordan sat in a quiet corner of a dimly lit diner, their coffee cups untouched as the hum of conversation and the clatter of dishes filled the room. Jason rubbed his side, wincing slightly, while Jordan tapped his fingers against the table in impatience. "She's late," Jordan muttered, glancing at the door for the third time in as many minutes. Jason didn't look up. She'll be here. She knows what's at stake. The bell above the door jingled, and Detective Maria Carter strode in. Dressed in jeans and a leather jacket, she scanned the room quickly, her sharp gaze locking on the brothers. She moved toward them, her steps brisk, her face set in a tense expression. "Morning," she said, as she slid into the booth across from them. Her eyes flicked between the two, lingering on Jason's stiffness and their visible bruises. "You look like you've been through a war zone." Jordan smirked faintly. "You should see the other guys." Maria's expression didn't soften. "You're lucky you didn't end up in the morgue. Those guys aren't amateurs." Jason leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. "We didn't have a choice, Maria. They came after us." Maria sighed, leaning back in the booth. "And now you're here because you want something from me. Let me guess. You want to know who's behind Rico's crew." Jordan folded his arms. "We don't just want to know. We need to know. They're not just a gang." Rico mentioned a bounty system, and he wasn't bluffing. Maria's eyes widened slightly. "A bounty system?" Jason nodded. "They're targeting specific people, like us. Rico called it cleaning up the town. This isn't just random violence. It's organized, and it's funded." Maria exhaled slowly, her face darkening. "That explains a lot. I've been tracking similar incidents for weeks. Attacks on families, vandalized businesses, people getting forced out of neighborhoods. I knew it was coordinated, but I couldn't connect the dots. A bounty system." She shook her head. "This is worse than I thought." Jordan leaned forward, his voice sharp. "So why isn't anyone doing anything about it?" Maria hesitated, glancing around the diner before speaking in a low tone. "You really want to know? It's a mix of incompetence, apathy, and lack of resources. Half the department doesn't care because it's not happening in their neighborhoods. The other half cares but doesn't have the funding to do anything about it. And the higher-ups? They're too worried about stirring up political backlash to touch something like this." Jason's jaw tightened, his voice cold. "So they're just going to let it happen?" Maria leaned forward, her voice hard. "I'm not letting it happen. That's why I'm here. But if I push too hard without solid proof, I'll get shut down faster than you can blink. That's how this works." Jordan shook his head, his frustration evident. "Meanwhile, people are getting hurt, or worse. And these guys are walking around with bounties in their pockets like it's open season." Maria's expression softened slightly. "That's why we need to be smart about this. If you go after Rico without a plan, you're just going to make things worse. For yourselves and everyone else." Jason nodded slowly. "We get it. But Rico's the key. He's the connection between the gang and whoever's pulling the strings. If we can get to him, we can start unraveling this." Maria hesitated, then sighed. "All right, I'll dig into Rico's known associates and see what I can find. But you need to promise me you won't do anything reckless in the meantime." Jordan smirked faintly. "No promises." Maria rolled her eyes, but she pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket and slid it across the table. "What's this?" Jason asked, picking it up. "An address," Maria replied. "It's a known hangout for Rico's crew. I was planning to check it out myself, but I figure you'd rather handle it your way." Jason studied the paper, nodding. "This is a good start." Maria stood, her gaze steady. "Be careful. These guys aren't just street thugs. They've got backing, and they've got numbers." Jason met her eyes. "We'll be careful. But we're not backing down." Maria hesitated, then gave a small nod. "I'll call if I find anything else. Just don't make me regret this." As she left, Jordan glanced at his brother, a spark of determination in his eyes. "This is it," Jordan said. "We've got our lead." Jason folded the paper and slipped it into his pocket. "Now we find Rico. And this time, he doesn't walk away." Jason and Jordan parked a few blocks away from the address Maria had given them. The location wasn't what they expected. A run-down bar tucked between a laundromat and a pawn shop in a busy part of town. From the outside, it looked ordinary enough, but the faint smell of stale beer and cigarette smoke wafting from the entrance suggested it was a haven for people who didn't want to be noticed. The brothers walked casually down the street, blending into the mid-afternoon crowd. Jason's eyes swept the area, his military instincts kicking in. The bar's windows were tinted, offering little visibility inside, but the faint silhouettes of figures moving behind them hinted at activity. Public place, Jordan muttered under his breath. Smart. They can blend in and keep an eye on anyone snooping around. Jason nodded, his expression neutral. Also means we need to tread carefully. One wrong move, and this whole block could turn into a powder keg. They reached the bar and paused just outside. Jason adjusted his jacket, subtly ensuring the small concealed recorder in his pocket was secure. Jordan took a deep breath, straightening his posture and letting his natural confidence take over. You ready for this? Jason asked quietly. Jordan gave him a faint smirk. Always. They pushed the door open, stepping into the dimly lit space. The room was exactly what they expected. Sticky floors, a jukebox humming faintly in the corner, and a scattering of patrons hunched over drinks at mismatched tables. At the far end of the bar, a group of men sat clustered together, their laughter harsh and grating. Jason and Jordan exchanged a glance, then moved to an empty table near the corner. They sat with their backs to the wall, giving them a clear view of the room. Subtle, aren't they? Jordan murmured, nodding toward the group at the bar. Most of the men were bald, their tattoos partially visible beneath rolled-up sleeves. Their conversation was low, but every now and then, bursts of crude laughter carried across the room. Jason didn't reply, his attention fixed on the group. His trained eye picked up on the way they positioned themselves, backs to the wall, eyes constantly scanning the room. They were cautious, clearly used to trouble. The bartender approached their table, a heavy-set man with a scowl etched into his face. What'll it be? Just a couple of beers, Jason said, keeping his tone casual. The bartender grunted and shuffled off. Jordan leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. This place is crawling with them. Half these guys are probably part of Rico's crew. Jason's jaw tightened. We can't afford to be obvious. Let's watch, listen, and see if we can pick up anything useful. As they waited for their drinks, the brothers kept their eyes on the group at the bar. Rico wasn't among them, but the men's body language suggested they were connected, slapping each other on the back, laughing loudly, and occasionally muttering something that made the others nod. Think Rico's gonna show? Jordan asked quietly. Maybe, Jason replied. But even if he doesn't, these guys might know something. We just need a way to draw them out. Their conversation was interrupted by a loud burst of laughter from the bar. One of the men, a wiry guy with a tattoo of a snake winding up his neck, pointed toward their table, muttering something to his friends. Jason caught the movement out of the corner of his eye and tensed. Heads up, they're clocking us. Jordan smirked faintly, leaning back in his chair as if he didn't have a care in the world. Let them look. We're just a couple of guys grabbing a drink. The bartender returned with their beers, slamming them down harder than necessary. Jason slid a few bills across the table, nodding his thanks. Anything we say here is fair game, Jason murmured, taking a sip of his drink. Stay cool. The group at the bar seemed to lose interest for a moment, turning their attention back to their conversation. But Jason could still feel their eyes flicking back toward them every now and then. What do you think they're waiting for? Jordan asked under his breath. Confirmation, Jason replied. They're trying to figure out if we're a threat. We're new faces in their territory. Minutes passed, the tension in the room thickening like a storm cloud. Jason's fingers drummed lightly on the table as he processed the situation. Finally, the man with the snake tattoo stood, grabbing his beer and swaggering toward their table. Jason and Jordan straightened slightly, their movements casual but prepared. Don't see you two around here often, the man drawled, his grin more threatening than friendly. First time, Jason replied evenly. The man's gaze swept over them, his smirk growing. You don't look like locals. We're not, Jordan said, leaning back in his chair. Just passing through, the man chuckled, taking a swig of his beer. Funny. People don't usually pass through here unless they're looking for something. Jason met his gaze, his tone calm but firm. Maybe we're just looking for a drink. The man's grin faltered slightly, and he leaned in closer. Well, enjoy it while you can. People who don't belong don't usually stick around for long. The tension hung heavy as the man sauntered back to the bar, leaving Jason and Jordan to exchange a quiet glance. We're on their radar, Jason muttered. "We need to move carefully." Jordan nodded, his voice low. "Let's see what else we can find out before we blow this place." The atmosphere in the bar remained heavy, as Jason and Jordan sat in their corner, quietly observing. The group at the bar continued their loud conversation, though their glances toward the brothers grew less frequent. It was a temporary reprieve, and both Jason and Jordan knew it. Then, Jason's sharp gaze caught movement. One of the men, a broad, tattooed figure with a shaved head, rose from his stool, clutching a phone in his hand. He muttered something to the group, who laughed but waved him off. The man drained the rest of his beer and moved toward a door in the back, marked with a faded "Employees Only" sign. "Did you see that?" Jason murmured, his voice barely audible. Jordan nodded, his expression serious. "Think it's worth checking out?" "Definitely," Jason replied. "If he's stepping away from the group, he might know something, or be someone important." Jordan smirked faintly. "Guess it's time for a little recon." The brothers rose from their seats, moving casually toward the back of the bar. Jason left a few bills on the table as they passed, ensuring their exit wouldn't draw attention. They waited until the man disappeared through the door, then followed. The hallway behind the bar was narrow and dimly lit, the faint smell of cleaning chemicals mingling with the musty air. Jason moved silently, his steps calculated, while Jordan stayed close behind. The man didn't notice them at first. He was fiddling with his phone, muttering under his breath as he walked further into the hallway. But then he stopped abruptly, his head turning slightly as though sensing their presence. Jason and Jordan froze, pressing themselves against the wall. But it was too late. The man glanced over his shoulder, his eyes narrowing as he spotted them. "Hey!" he barked, his voice sharp with suspicion. "What do you think you're doing back here?" Jason didn't answer. He stepped forward, his movements quick but deliberate. The man's suspicion turned to panic. "Wait! Hold on!" Before he could finish, Jason closed the distance between them, grabbing the man's wrist and twisting it behind his back. The phone clattered to the ground as Jordan stepped in, clamping a hand over the man's mouth to muffle his protests. "Quiet," Jason hissed, his voice low and commanding. "You don't want to make this worse for yourself." The man thrashed, but Jason's grip was ironclad. Jordan pressed him against the wall, his tone laced with mockery. "Not so tough without your buddies, huh?" The man's eyes darted wildly between the brothers, his muffled protests growing frantic. Jason glanced down the hall, ensuring they hadn't drawn attention, then motioned for Jordan to follow. "Back room," Jason said quietly, nodding toward a door at the end of the hallway. Together, they maneuvered the struggling man into the room, shutting the door behind them. It was a storage closet, cluttered with crates of beer and cleaning supplies. The dim bulb overhead cast flickering shadows, adding to the tense atmosphere. Jordan let go of the man's mouth, but Jason kept his arm pinned. "Start talking," Jason demanded, his voice cold. The man winced, his face pale. "I don't know what you want, I swear." "Wrong answer," Jordan interrupted, stepping closer. His imposing frame loomed over the man. "You're part of Rico's crew, right? We know what you're up to, and we're not leaving until you give us something useful." The man shook his head frantically. "I don't know anything. I just hang out at the bar, that's all." Jason tightened his grip, eliciting a pained grunt. "Don't waste our time. We saw how the others listened to you. You're not just some guy at the bar." The man's breathing quickened, his panic palpable. All right. Just let me go, and I'll tell you what I know." Jason exchanged a glance with Jordan before releasing the man's wrist, though he remained close enough to act, if necessary. "Talk," Jason ordered. The man rubbed his arm, his eyes darting toward the door as though calculating an escape. Jordan stepped into his line of sight, cutting off the thought. "Don't even think about it," Jordan warned. The man swallowed hard, his voice trembling. Okay. Rico's got something big planned, all right? He didn't tell us everything, but it's happening soon. Some kind of hit list. Names, places. It's all been mapped out." Jason's eyes narrowed. "Who's funding him?" "I don't know," the man insisted, holding up his hands defensively. "Rico's the only one who talks to the guy. We just follow orders." Jordan crossed his arms, his tone cold. "Where's Rico now?" The man hesitated, glancing nervously between them. I don't know exactly, but he mentioned a meeting tonight, at the old warehouse on 9th. That's all I know, I swear." Jason studied him for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he pulled a roll of duct tape from one of the nearby shelves. "Wait! What are you—" the man began, but Jordan shoved him onto a chair in the corner. "We can't risk you going back out there and warning them," Jason said, his voice steady. Jordan worked quickly, securing the man's wrists and ankles with the tape. Jason added a piece across his mouth, silencing any protests. "You'll be fine," Jordan said, his tone mocking as he patted the man's shoulder. "Just sit tight. Someone will find you. Eventually." The man's muffled grunts followed them as they stepped out of the room, shutting the door behind them. Jason glanced at Jordan. "Let's move. We've got our lead." Jordan nodded. "Warehouse on 9th. Time to pay Rico a visit." Jason and Jordan drove home in silence, the weight of their next steps heavy between them. The information they had from the man at the bar was valuable, but it painted a grim picture. Rico was planning something big, and the stakes were higher than ever. If they made a wrong move, the consequences wouldn't just fall on them, but on countless innocent lives. When they reached their modest apartment, Jason unlocked the door and stepped inside, immediately scanning the space out of habit. Jordan followed, dropping his jacket on the back of the couch and pacing the room. "We can't just rush in," Jason said, breaking the silence. He moved to the dining table, clearing the clutter and spreading out a map of the city they'd tacked with pins and notes earlier. Jordan frowned, leaning on the table. "I know, but sitting around feels like a waste of time. Rico's meeting is tonight. If we don't act fast, we might lose him." Jason shook his head, pointing at the map. "This isn't just about catching him in the act. Rico's a pawn, but he's close to whoever's pulling the strings. If we rush in and take him out, we lose any chance of exposing the bigger operation. We need a plan to isolate him, take the gang down, and get him talking." Jordan exhaled sharply, crossing his arms. "All right. What are you thinking?" Jason straightened, his tone firm. "First, we prepare for a fight. If Rico's meeting goes south, he'll either try to run or double down with the gang. We can't risk being outnumbered or outgunned. Second, we make sure he doesn't have anywhere to run. We'll tip off Maria and the police, but we need to make sure they're ready to move when we give them the signal." Jordan smirked. "So, we get Rico cornered, cut him off from his crew, and make him spill his guts." "Sounds easy enough." Jason shot him a look. "It won't be. Rico's not an idiot, and his men are loyal. At least, as long as they think they're getting paid. We'll need to create a diversion to split the gang and get Rico alone." Jordan nodded, already running scenarios in his head. "Okay. So, how do we draw them out?" Jason tapped the map, circling a warehouse district near the edge of town. "We know he's meeting there tonight. That's our opportunity to make some noise and rattle them. But we need to be smart about it. If we go in guns blazing, we'll spook him." Jordan grinned, his confidence returning. "A little misdirection, then. We stir up enough chaos to keep the gang busy while we grab Rico." Jason nodded. "Exactly. And if we time it right, we can tip off Maria and have the police sweep in to take down the rest of the crew while we deal with Rico." Jordan arched a brow. "You think Maria's going to go along with this? She didn't exactly seem thrilled about us taking the lead." Jason smirked faintly. "She won't have a choice. If she wants Rico and his gang off the streets, this is her best shot." Jordan leaned back against the couch, a hint of amusement in his voice. "I've got to hand it to you, Jason. You always did like turning everything into a mission briefing." Jason chuckled softly. Old habits die hard. The brothers spent the next hour preparing for the night ahead. Jason retrieved their duffel bag of gear, laying out everything they might need. Knives, gloves, compact radios, and a few makeshift tools for breaching if necessary. Meanwhile, Jordan focused on strategy, sketching out rough plans for entry and exit points. "If we can block off this side of the warehouse," he said, pointing to a section of the map, "we'll funnel Rico toward us. We take him down, and the rest of the gang has nowhere to go when the cops roll in." Jason nodded, his expression focused. "Agreed. but we need to be ready for anything. Rico's not going to make this easy. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting the apartment in a golden glow, the brothers took a moment to breathe. "You nervous?" Jordan asked, breaking the silence. Jason shook his head, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of tension. "Not nervous, just focused. This isn't like the missions we ran in the field. If we mess up here, we're not the only ones who'll pay for it." Jordan nodded, his tone serious. "We won't mess up. We've got this." Jason offered a faint smile, clasping his brother's shoulder. "We'll finish this, Jordan, one way or another." As night fell, the brothers gathered their gear, their resolve hardening. The stakes were high, but they knew what needed to be done. "Let's move," Jason said, as they stepped out into the cool night air. "It's time to end this." The air was cool and still as Jason and Jordan approached the warehouse district, their movements silent and deliberate. The glow of streetlights barely penetrated the shadows cast by the looming, rust-streaked buildings. A chill ran through the air, but it wasn't just the temperature. It was the weight of what lay ahead. Jason stopped at the edge of a row of stacked crates, scanning the area with his binoculars. The warehouse loomed about 50 yards away, its exterior dotted with broken windows and faintly glowing lights from within. A pair of guards stood by the main entrance, their postures tense, but their focus lazy as they occasionally glanced at their phones. "Rico's definitely here," Jason murmured, lowering the binoculars. Jordan crouched beside him, adjusting his gloves. "How many?" "Two at the door," Jason replied. "But there's more inside. I saw movement near the upper windows. Could be lookouts, maybe another crew hanging back." Jordan smirked faintly. "Looks like a party. Shame we weren't invited." Jason didn't respond to the quip, his mind already calculating their next steps. He pointed to the side of the warehouse, where a rusted fire escape zigzagged up the wall. "We take the side route," Jason said. "No way we're walking in the front door. If we get to the upper floor, we can listen in without drawing attention." Jordan nodded. "And if things go sideways?" Jason gave him a sharp look. "We adapt. But the goal is to isolate Rico, not start a war." The brothers moved swiftly, keeping low as they approached the building. They circled around to the fire escape, their steps careful on the cracked asphalt. Jason reached the ladder first, testing the rusted metal before climbing. It groaned under his weight, but it held firm. Jordan followed, his movements just as silent. As they climbed, they caught a faint hum of voices from within the warehouse. Jason held up a hand, signaling for Jordan to stop. They paused, pressing themselves against the wall near a broken window. Inside, the voices grew clearer. Jason peeked through the gap, his sharp eyes scanning the room. Rico stood in the center of a group of men, his large frame impossible to miss. He was gesturing wildly, his voice carrying an edge of impatience. "We don't have time to mess around," Rico was saying. "The boss wants results, and he's not paying us to sit on our hands. Tonight's the test run. After this, we go big." One of the men shifted uncomfortably. "And what if something goes wrong? The cops are already sniffing around." Rico glared at him, his tone sharp. "That's why we're doing this smart. The boss has connections. No one's touching us. Just stick to the plan, and we'll all get paid." Jason's jaw tightened as he listened. He motioned for Jordan to move closer, whispering in his ear, "He's planning something big. This isn't just about us. They've got a larger operation in motion." Jordan nodded, his expression grim. "Sounds like tonight's just the start." Jason pulled out the small handheld radio Maria had given them earlier. "Time to let Maria know. She'll need to get the police ready to move as soon as we've got Rico isolated." As Jason whispered into the radio, relaying the details to Maria, Jordan kept watch. Rico's tone shifted, his frustration giving way to a smug confidence. "Relax," Rico said, flashing a crooked grin. "This town's ours. After tonight, they'll know it too." Jason finished his transmission and tucked the radio back into his pocket. "Maria's mobilizing the police," he said quietly. "They'll move in once we've got Rico pinned. We just need to get him away from the rest of the crew." Jordan smirked faintly. "And how exactly do we do that?" Jason's lips curled into a small smile. "We give him a reason to leave." The brothers climbed down the fire escape, moving quickly and quietly to a shadowed corner near the side entrance. Jason retrieved a small firecracker-like device from their gear bag, one of the improvised tools they'd prepared earlier. "We set this off here," Jason said, planting the device near a stack of crates. "It'll draw their attention, maybe pull some of them outside. If we're lucky, Rico will come out to see what's going on." Jordan grinned, his excitement barely contained. "You've always been good at making noise." Jason rolled his eyes, but couldn't help a smirk. "Let's just hope it works." With the device in place, they moved back to a safer vantage point, waiting for the right moment. Jason pressed the detonator, and the firecracker sparked to life, sending a sharp crack echoing through the air. Inside, the group's conversation halted abruptly. Rico barked orders, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Go check it out!" he snapped. Two of his men rushed toward the side entrance, leaving Rico and a smaller group inside. Jason nodded to Jordan, his voice low. "Now's our chance." As the gang moved to investigate the noise, the brothers slipped into the warehouse through the side door, their steps silent as they prepared to execute the next phase of their plan. Jason and Jordan slipped through the side door of the warehouse, moving with practiced silence. Inside, the faint hum of machinery and the murmur of voices filled the air. Rico stood at the center of a loose circle of gang members, gesturing angrily as he barked orders. "Get your heads in the game!" Rico snapped. "We've got work to do tonight, and I don't have time for screw-ups." The brothers crouched behind a stack of crates, watching the scene unfold. Jason's sharp eyes scanned the room, taking in the layout, the exits, and the positions of the men. There were at least 6 of them, including Rico, enough to make things messy. "We can't wait much longer," Jordan whispered. "If they spread out, it'll get harder to control." Jason nodded. "We'll make our move now. Time to draw them out." The brothers stood, stepping into the light. The scrape of their boots against the floor drew every pair of eyes in the room. "Well, well," Rico drawled, his lips curling into a smirk. "Look who decided to show up." The gang turned toward the twins, their hands instinctively moving to their weapons. Tension rippled through the air, thick and suffocating. Jason stepped forward, his voice calm but commanding. "Rico, it's over. We know what you're planning. And it ends here. You're not walking out of this warehouse with your crew intact." Rico laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "You two think you can just waltz in here and shut us down? You've got guts, I'll give you that. But you're out of your league." Jordan crossed his arms, his expression cold. "You're the one out of your league. You think running a crew and throwing out bounties makes you untouchable? Newsflash. We've taken down guys a lot bigger and smarter than you." One of the gang members, a wiry man with tattoos snaking up his neck, stepped forward, sneering. "Big talk for 2 guys against all of us." Jason's gaze didn't waver. "You don't have to do this. Walk away now, and you won't get hurt." Rico's smirk faded, replaced by a glint of anger. "You're real funny, you know that? You think you can just show up here and tell us what to do? This is our town. We call the shots." Jordan took a step closer, his tone sharp. "What you're doing isn't calling the shots. It's cowardice. Targeting innocent people, hiding behind numbers. That's not power. That's desperation." The room grew quieter, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. The gang exchanged uneasy glances, their confidence shaken by the twins' composure. But Rico wasn't backing down. He took a step forward, his eyes narrowing. "You don't get it, do you? This town belongs to us now. People like you don't belong here. We're cleaning up, making it right again. And if a few people get hurt along the way, so be it." Jason's jaw tightened, his voice dropping to a dangerous tone. "This isn't about the town. It's about your ego. You're using hate to cover for the fact that you're nothing without your crew." That struck a nerve. Rico's face twisted with anger, and he pulled a crowbar from a nearby crate, gripping it tightly. "You've got a big mouth for someone who's about to get crushed." Jordan smirked, stepping up beside Jason. "Careful, Rico. That crowbar's not going to help when you're flat on your back." Rico's men began to move, closing in slowly. One of them muttered, "Let's just take 'em out, boss." Jason raised his hands slightly, palms outward, a gesture meant to hold them at bay. Think carefully about your next move. This doesn't have to end with you in handcuffs or worse. Rico grinned darkly. No, but it's going to end with you two on the ground. The tension snapped like a rubber band. Rico swung the crowbar in a wide arc, aiming for Jason. Jason ducked, his movements quick and precise, and the fight erupted in a storm of fists, weapons, and chaos. The room erupted into chaos as Rico swung his crowbar at Jason, missing by inches. The metallic clang echoed through the warehouse as the twins braced themselves. The gang advanced, their weapons gleaming in the dim light, and the tension snapped into an all-out brawl. Jason dodged a heavy punch from one of Rico's men, countering with a sharp elbow to the ribs. The thug grunted in pain, but swung again, catching Jason in the side. Jason staggered, his breath hitching from the impact, but he quickly regained his footing. "Jordan, watch your left," Jason called, blocking another blow aimed at his head. Jordan turned just in time to see a knife-wielding attacker lunging at him. He sidestepped, grabbing the man's wrist and twisting it hard. The knife clattered to the floor, and Jordan followed up with a brutal knee to the man's stomach, sending him to the ground. "Thanks for the heads up," Jordan muttered, his voice tight as he ducked under a pipe swing aimed at his head. "Stay sharp," Jason replied, dodging another wild punch. Rico barked orders from the center of the room, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Don't let them split you up. Take them down." The gang pressed forward, their numbers forcing Jason and Jordan into defensive positions. Jason deflected a crowbar aimed at his shoulder, grabbing the weapon and yanking it from his attacker's hands. He spun, using the crowbar to block another swing before slamming it into a man's shin. Jordan, meanwhile, was grappling with two men at once. One tried to grab him from behind, locking an arm around his neck, but Jordan shifted his weight, throwing the man over his shoulder. The second thug charged, swinging a wrench, but Jordan ducked low, delivering a sharp uppercut that sent the attacker reeling. "Jason, there's too many of them," Jordan shouted, his chest heaving as he blocked another blow. Jason glanced around, his sharp mind working quickly. "We've got to divide them," he said. "Draw them away from Rico." Jordan nodded, breaking away from his current opponent. He feinted a retreat, taunting the group. "Come on! You call that a fight?" The gang took the bait, several of them breaking off to chase Jordan toward the far end of the warehouse. Jason seized the opportunity, focusing on the remaining group. Rico, seeing the shift, sneered and moved to intercept Jordan. "You think you're clever?" he growled, swinging a pipe at Jordan. Jordan dodged, his movements fluid. "Clever enough to make you look stupid," Rico roared in frustration, his swings becoming more erratic. Jordan ducked under one blow, landing a solid punch to Rico's side, but one of Rico's men blindsided him, tackling him into a stack of crates. "Jordan!" Jason called, but he was forced to fend off another attacker before he could help. The fight was brutal and unrelenting. Both brothers landed powerful blows, their years of training evident in every move. But the gang's sheer numbers took a toll. Jason took a hit to the ribs, the pain sharp and immediate, but he pushed through it, disarming his attacker with a swift kick to the wrist. Jordan struggled to his feet, blocking a punch just in time. He retaliated with a headbutt, the force enough to send his opponent stumbling back. Rico stepped forward again, his pipe raised, but Jordan grabbed a nearby crate and hurled it at him. The crate smashed into Rico's chest, knocking him off balance. "You're not walking out of here, Rico!" Jordan spat, wiping blood from his lip. Jason finally broke free from his opponents, rushing to his brother's side. "You good?" he asked, his breathing labored. Jordan nodded, though his stance was tense. Still standing. The gang regrouped, their confidence wavering but their numbers still daunting. Rico snarled, pointing at the twins. "Finish them! Now!" Jason exchanged a look with Jordan, their silent communication honed from years of working together. They adjusted their stances, preparing for the next wave. "They're not backing down," Jordan muttered, his tone grim. "Neither are we," Jason replied. The gang charged again, and the twins met them head-on. Jordan ducked under a swinging pipe, using his momentum to tackle the attacker to the ground. Jason delivered a series of quick punches, his movements precise and unrelenting. For every man they took down, another seemed to take his place. The warehouse echoed with the sounds of grunts, crashes, and the clatter of weapons hitting the floor. Both brothers bore the marks of the fight. Bruises blossomed on their arms and faces, and blood trickled from split lips and shallow cuts, but they didn't falter. As the gang pressed closer, the brothers maneuvered toward a stack of crates, using the elevated position to their advantage. Jason pulled Jordan up beside him, the two standing back to back as the gang surrounded them. "This is getting old," Jordan quipped, wiping sweat from his brow. "Stay focused," Jason said, his eyes darting between their attackers. The gang hesitated for a moment, their movements slowing. The twins, battered but unbroken, stared them down, ready for whatever came next. Jason and Jordan moved as one, their movements fluid and precise, despite the exhaustion etched across their faces. With their backs against the stack of crates, they deflected every attack, landing punishing blows against Rico's gang. The tide of the fight had shifted. The gang's confidence was unraveling, their strikes more desperate, and their numbers thinning. Jason ducked under a crowbar swing, retaliating with a hard jab to his attacker's ribs. The man grunted, stumbling back before Jason swept his legs out from under him. Jordan, a few feet away, was locked in a grapple with two thugs. One grabbed his arm while the other swung a wrench, but Jordan twisted sharply, using his momentum to throw the first man into the second. Both collapsed in a heap. Rico watched the scene unfold, his sneer fading as more of his men hit the ground. "Idiots!" he shouted, stepping back toward the far wall. "Get it together! They're just two guys who are wiping the floor with you." Jordan shot back, his tone mocking. Rico snarled, grabbing a metal pipe from a nearby crate and charging toward Jason. Jason turned just in time, blocking the swing with his forearm and twisting the pipe from Rico's hands. He shoved Rico back, his glare sharp. "Is this all you've got?" Jason growled. Rico didn't answer, stumbling over a fallen crate as he tried to regain his footing. "Boss!" one of the gang members called, desperation in his voice. "The cops! Listen!" The faint wail of sirens grew louder, cutting through the noise of the fight. Rico's eyes darted toward the nearest exit, panic flashing across his face. Jordan caught the shift in Rico's demeanor and smirked. "What's the matter, Rico? Starting to realize you're out of options?" "Shut up," Rico snapped, backing toward the side door. "This isn't over." Jason advanced, his stance steady. "It is for you. The rest of your crew is going down, and so are you." Rico's men hesitated, glancing nervously at one another. The sirens were unmistakable now, the glow of red and blue lights faintly visible through the warehouse windows. "You hear that?" Jason said, his voice calm but firm. "That's the sound of the end for you and your operation." Rico's face twisted with rage, and he made a desperate move, lunging at Jason with his fists raised. Jason sidestepped, grabbing Rico's arm and using his momentum to throw him into a stack of barrels. Rico groaned, clutching his shoulder as he tried to push himself up. Before Jason or Jordan could advance further, one of the gang members threw a metal pipe toward them, forcing the twins to duck. The distraction was enough. Rico scrambled to his feet and bolted for the side door. "He's running!" Jason shouted, immediately breaking into a sprint after him. "Go!" Jordan yelled, fending off another attacker who tried to block his path. Rico crashed through the side door, the sound of his heavy footsteps fading into the distance. Jason followed close behind, his focus razor-sharp. Jordan finished off his current opponent with a hard kick, then sprinted after his brother, leaving the remaining gang members to scatter as the sirens grew deafening. The chase led them out of the warehouse and into the darkness of the forest beyond. Rico tore through the underbrush, his movements frantic and uncoordinated. The faint glow of city lights faded as the trees grew denser, casting long, eerie shadows across the uneven ground. Jason was close on his heels, his breathing controlled despite the strain of the fight. "Rico!" he shouted, his voice cutting through the night. "You're only making this worse for yourself." Rico didn't respond, his only focus on running. He stumbled over a root, barely catching himself before veering off the faint trail into deeper woods. Jordan caught up to Jason, his steps quieter, but just as determined. "You see him?" "Yeah," Jason muttered, pointing toward the faint silhouette of Rico ahead. "He's slowing down." "He won't get far." Rico glanced over his shoulder, his face pale with fear. "Stay back," he shouted, his voice shaky. Jason smirked grimly. "Or what? You'll trip and fall." The comment seemed to light a fire under Rico, who pushed himself harder, crashing through a thicket of bushes. But the effort was futile. The twins were closing in. Finally, Jason lunged forward, tackling Rico to the ground. The two rolled across the forest floor, landing in a patch of damp leaves. Rico thrashed wildly, swinging his fists, but Jason pinned him down, his grip unyielding. Jordan arrived seconds later, grabbing Rico's arms and helping secure him. "You're done," Jordan said, his voice cold. "No more running," Rico growled, still struggling. "You think this ends with me? You're fools if you think I'm the one calling the shots." Jason leaned closer, his tone sharp. "Then tell us who is." Rico sneered but said nothing, his defiance still burning despite the dirt and blood on his face. The distant glow of flashlights and the crackle of police radios signaled that backup was closing in. Jason and Jordan exchanged a look, their expressions grim but resolute. "You're coming with us," Jason said, hauling Rico to his feet. "And you're going to talk." Jason and Jordan tightened their grip on Rico as they began escorting him out of the forest. The faint glow of the city lights in the distance provided little relief from the oppressive darkness that surrounded them. The only sounds were their labored breathing, the crunch of leaves underfoot, and the distant wail of approaching sirens. Rico walked between them, his shoulders tense, but his steps obedient. For now, Jason kept a firm hold on his arm, his sharp eyes scanning the shadows ahead. Jordan walked a step behind, his gaze flickering between the path and Rico, his stance ready for any sudden moves. "This doesn't have to get any worse for you," Jason said, his voice low but firm. "You cooperate, and maybe, just maybe, you'll have a chance to walk away from this with a deal." Rico let out a dry, humorless laugh. "A deal? You're dreaming. You don't even know what you're up against." Jordan leaned in closer, his tone sharp. "Then enlighten us. Who's pulling your strings, Rico?" Rico glanced at him, his lips curling into a smug grin, despite the dirt and blood smeared across his face. "You think I'm scared of you? You've got nothing. You're chasing shadows." Jason's jaw tightened, but he didn't rise to the bait. "Keep moving," he ordered, steering Rico forward. For a moment, the tension seemed to ease. Rico trudged along without resistance, the faint sound of sirens drawing closer. But as they approached a clearing, Rico suddenly stopped, his body tensing like a coiled spring. Jason's instincts kicked in immediately. "Don't even think about it." Before he could finish, Rico twisted sharply, driving his elbow into Jason's ribs. The blow was quick and brutal, catching Jason off guard and forcing him to loosen his grip. Rico didn't hesitate. He spun around, landing a wild punch squarely on Jordan's face, sending him stumbling back into a tree. "Rico!" Jason shouted, lunging forward. But Rico was already running, disappearing into the dark maze of trees. "Damn it!" Jordan growled, rubbing his jaw as he pushed himself off the tree. "You okay?" Jason asked, already sprinting after Rico. "Fine," Jordan replied, shaking off the pain. "Let's get him!" The chase was on again, but this time the forest seemed to conspire against them. The darkness pressed in on all sides, the faint moonlight barely piercing the thick canopy of branches overhead. The sounds of Rico's frantic flight, crunching leaves, snapping twigs, echoed ominously, blending with the natural rustle of the forest. Jason and Jordan pushed forward, their breathing ragged but determined. Every shadow seemed to shift, every rustle a potential ambush. "Keep an eye on the ground," Jason said, his voice low. "He'll try to trip us up." "Yeah, well, he already hit my face," Jordan muttered. "I'm not letting him get away with it." The faint sound of Rico's footsteps grew louder, but then, abruptly, they stopped. Jason and Jordan froze, their eyes scanning the darkness. "Where is he?" Jordan whispered, his voice barely audible. Jason held up a hand, signaling for silence. He strained his ears, listening for any hint of movement. The forest was eerily quiet now, the oppressive silence broken only by the occasional hoot of an owl in the distance. Then, a rustling sound to their left. Both brothers turned, their eyes locking on the faint outline of a figure moving through the underbrush. "There!" Jason hissed, taking off toward the sound. Jordan followed close behind, his adrenaline surging as they closed in. The chase was relentless, the uneven terrain and low-hanging branches threatening to slow them down. But Rico's movements were growing more erratic, his exhaustion starting to show. "Stop running, Rico!" Jordan shouted, his voice cutting through the darkness. Rico didn't reply, his breath coming in ragged gasps as he stumbled over a root. He caught himself and kept moving, but his pace was slowing. Jason was the first to close the gap, reaching out to grab Rico's shoulder. Rico spun around, swinging wildly with a branch he'd picked up. Jason ducked, the branch narrowly missing his head. "Give it up, Rico," Jason growled, dodging another swing. Jordan arrived seconds later, tackling Rico to the ground. The three of them crashed into the dirt, the impact jarring. Rico thrashed wildly, kicking and clawing in a desperate attempt to break free. "You're done!" Jordan spat, wrestling Rico's arm behind his back. "Get off me!" Rico snarled, trying to buck Jordan off. Jason grabbed Rico's other arm, pinning it down as he leaned in close. "You think you can keep running? Look around, Rico. There's nowhere left to go." Rico stopped struggling for a moment, his chest heaving as he glared up at the twins. "You don't get it," he panted. "You don't even know who you're dealing with." Jason's grip tightened. "Then tell us, who's behind this?" Rico's defiance faltered for a brief moment, his gaze darting between the twins and the faint glow of the police lights now visible through the trees. The sound of footsteps and voices grew louder as the officers approached, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. Jason and Jordan hauled Rico to his feet, holding him firmly as the police arrived. "You're not running anymore," Jason said, his voice cold. "It's over." Rico sat slumped on a tree stump, his arms restrained by zip ties provided by the police. The red and blue glow of the squad cars flashed faintly through the trees, illuminating his bruised and dirt-streaked face. Jason and Jordan stood a few feet away, their expressions hard as they caught their breath. Detective Maria Carter approached from the direction of the flashing lights, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. She took one look at Rico, then at the twins. "Looks like you had a long night," she said dryly, her tone masking her concern. Jason wiped sweat from his brow, his gaze never leaving Rico. "It's not over yet," Maria nodded, crouching in front of Rico. "All right, tough guy. You're going to start talking now. Who's pulling your strings? Who's behind the bounty system?" Rico glared at her, his lip curling in defiance. "You think I'm just gonna spill because you ask nicely?" Maria smirked, her tone icy. "Oh, I'm not asking nicely. I'm giving you one chance to cooperate before you make things worse for yourself. You've already got enough charges to lock you up for decades. You think your boss is going to protect you when you're behind bars?" Jason stepped closer, his voice calm but menacing. "Rico, you're alone now. Your crew's scattered, your operations exposed, and the cops are ready to sweep up everything you've built. Your only chance at a deal is to give us what we need." Rico's eyes flickered with uncertainty, but he quickly masked it with a sneer. "You don't scare me. None of you know what you're dealing with. The guy in charge? He's untouchable. He's got connections everywhere. Money, power, the works." Maria exchanged a glance with Jason and Jordan, her tone steady but pressing. "Then why are you the one out here running scared while he sits in the shadows? Sounds like you're expendable to him." Jordan leaned in, his voice sharp. "Think about it, Rico. The guy you're protecting doesn't care about you. He left you out here to deal with this mess while he hides. You keep covering for him, and you're the one who pays the price." Rico's jaw tightened, his bravado cracking under the weight of their words. He looked away, his chest rising and falling as he struggled with his next move. Jason stepped closer, his tone low and deliberate. "This is your last chance, Rico. You talk or you go down as the fall guy for everything." You want to take the heat for him? Fine. But don't think for a second he's going to lift a finger to help you. Rico let out a bitter laugh, his gaze finally meeting Jason's. You think I don't know that? You think I don't know I'm a pawn in all this? Maria's expression softened slightly, though her voice remained firm. Then stop being a pawn. Give us the name. For a long moment, Rico was silent, the tension in the clearing thick and oppressive. Finally, he exhaled sharply, shaking his head. All right, fine. You want a name? I'll give you a name. Jason and Jordan exchanged a quick glance, their focus locked on Rico as he spoke. Calhoun, Rico said, his voice low but clear. James Calhoun. He's the one funding everything. The bounties, the operations, all of it. Maria's brow furrowed. James Calhoun? The real estate magnate? Rico nodded, his lips curling into a bitter smile. The very same. Guy's got half the city in his pocket. He's been buying up properties, driving out undesirables. And when the law didn't move fast enough for him, he paid us to speed things up. Jason's fists clenched at his sides, his voice tight with anger. And the bounties? Those were his idea too? Rico nodded. Yeah, said it was the most efficient way to clean up the neighborhoods he wanted. Offered big payouts for anyone who could remove the problem. You two? Just unlucky enough to end up on the list. Maria stood, her expression grim. If Calhoun's behind this, we're going to need more than your word. Where's the proof, Rico? Rico hesitated, his defiance resurfacing. You think I'm stupid enough to keep records? Calhoun's too smart for that. But there's one place you might find something. Jason stepped closer, his tone sharp. Where? Rico sighed heavily, his shoulders slumping. He's got a property outside of town, a private retreat. It's where he holds his meetings, keeps his documents. If you're looking for evidence, that's your best shot. Maria nodded, already reaching for her radio. We'll take it from here. Rico, you're done. And if you're lying, I'll make sure you never see daylight again. As the officers moved in to take Rico away, Jason and Jordan stood side by side, their expressions grim. This isn't over, Jason said quietly. Not by a long shot, Jordan replied, his gaze fixed on the distant glow of the city lights. The twins sat at the dining table in their modest apartment, a detailed map of the area spread out before them. Jason leaned forward, tracing his finger over a marked section just outside the city, a sprawling property surrounded by dense woods. Jordan stood nearby, arms crossed, his expression grim. This is it, Jason said, his voice steady but laced with tension. Calhoun's retreat. If Rico's telling the truth, the evidence we need is in there. Jordan nodded, his jaw tightening. Makes sense. A guy like Calhoun isn't stupid enough to leave a paper trail anywhere public. A private estate is exactly where he'd keep his secrets. Jason glanced up at his brother. But it also means getting in won't be easy. A place like this? It's probably got private security, cameras, maybe even motion sensors. We can't risk setting off alarms. Jordan smirked faintly, though there was little humor in it. So we sneak in, grab what we need, and get out before anyone knows we're there. Just like old times. Jason sat back, his expression serious. It's not a military op, Jordan. We can't just storm in. If we're caught, not only do we lose the evidence, but we tip Calhoun off. He'll bury everything before the police can make a move. Jordan rubbed the back of his neck, letting out a long breath. All right. So what's the plan? Jason tapped the map again, pointing to the northern edge of the property. The main road leads directly to the front gate, heavily monitored, no doubt. But there's a service entrance here, hidden by the tree line. It's our best shot at getting in unnoticed. Jordan crouched beside him, studying the map. And once we're inside, Jason pulled a second piece of paper closer. A crude layout of the estate sketched from aerial photos. The main house is here, at the center. According to Rico, Calhoun has a private office on the second floor. That's where we'll find the files, if they exist. Jordan's brow furrowed. And what about security inside? Jason shook his head. We'll have to assume the worst. Cameras, guards, maybe even dogs. But we're not going in blind. He pushed a small duffel bag across the table, unzipping it to reveal their gear. Night vision goggles, lock-picking tools, gloves, and a pair of compact flash drives. We use these to copy whatever files we find and get out as fast as possible. Jordan picked up one of the drives, turning it over in his hand. And then we take this straight to Maria? Jason nodded. It's the only way. If we give this to her, the police can raid the place with a warrant. But without evidence, they can't touch Calhoun. This is all or nothing. Jordan leaned back, his expression thoughtful. You realize we're on our own for this, right? No backup, no safety net. If something goes wrong, it won't, Jason said firmly. We've done this before. We can do it again. Jordan chuckled softly, shaking his head. You always were the optimist. Jason smirked faintly. And you always make sure I don't get too optimistic. The brothers exchanged a look, a silent understanding passing between them. They both knew the risks, but neither hesitated. This wasn't just about stopping Calhoun. It was about justice for the lives he had already destroyed, and the ones he would ruin if left unchecked. The night was moonless, the sky shrouded in thick clouds that cast the world in darkness. Jason and Jordan parked their car a mile from the property, trekking through the woods with only the faint glow of a handheld GPS to guide them. The air was cold, their breaths visible in the faint light. As they approached the estate, the faint outline of the main house came into view. A sprawling mansion surrounded by tall fences and floodlights. Jason motioned for Jordan to stop, crouching behind a cluster of bushes as he surveyed the area. 2 guards at the gate, Jason whispered. Armed. No sign of dogs yet, but that doesn't mean they're not here. Jordan nodded, his voice low. Service entrance is to the north. Let's move. They crept along the tree line, their steps silent against the damp ground. The service entrance was, as expected, smaller and less conspicuous than the main gate, with only a single camera mounted above the door. Jason reached into his bag, pulling out a small device that emitted a low-frequency signal. He aimed it at the camera, disabling it temporarily. We've got 2 minutes, Jason said, his voice barely audible. Let's go. The door was locked, but Jordan made quick work of it with the lock-picking tools. The door clicked open, and the brothers slipped inside, their movements practiced and efficient. The service hallway was narrow and dimly lit, leading toward the main house. Jason motioned toward a staircase at the end of the hall. That's our way in. They moved quickly but cautiously, their senses on high alert. The faint hum of security cameras and the occasional echo of footsteps reminded them of the stakes. At one point, they pressed themselves against the wall as a guard passed by, holding their breaths until the danger was gone. Reaching the 2nd floor, they found the office door locked. Jason crouched, working the lock as Jordan kept watch. Moments later, the door clicked open, revealing a sleek, modern office filled with shelves of files and a high-end computer. Jackpot, Jordan muttered, stepping inside. Jason plugged a flash drive into the computer, his fingers flying over the keyboard. Cover me. This'll take a minute. Jordan stood by the door, listening for any sign of movement as Jason worked. The tension was palpable, every second feeling like an eternity. Got it, Jason whispered, ejecting the drive and slipping it into his pocket. Let's move. The office was plunged into silence, save for the faint hum of the now emptied computer. Jason tucked the flash drive securely into his jacket pocket, his gaze darting toward the door where Jordan stood guard. Got everything we need, Jason whispered. Time to get out. Jordan nodded, his stance tense. Let's hope the way out's as smooth as the way in. Jason moved quickly toward the door, his steps light but deliberate. He peeked into the hallway, scanning for movement. The faint sound of footsteps echoed from somewhere down the corridor, but the path to the staircase appeared clear. For now, let's move, Jason murmured. The brothers slipped out of the office, their senses on high alert as they retraced their steps through the dimly lit halls. Every creak of the floorboards and flicker of the security lights felt magnified, the weight of the stolen evidence pressing heavily on their shoulders. As they descended the staircase, Jason raised a hand, signaling Jordan to stop. The faint murmur of voices drifted up from below, a pair of guards stationed near the service hallway. 2 of them, Jason whispered, crouching low, blocking the exit. Jordan frowned, his jaw tightening. We don't have time to wait for them to leave. They'll figure something's up soon enough. Jason's mind worked quickly, formulating a plan. We draw them away. You circle around and